Bad morning, everyone. Today is November 1st, 2018. Welcome to episode 74 of Bad Morning News. And hope you all had a good Halloween yesterday. A couple notes. Thanks to our sponsor, Brave Browser, for sponsoring the show. If you're tired of the typical companies selling off all of your data to the highest bidder, give Brave Browser a try. If you download Brave Browser via the link in our description box, it benefits the show, so thank you to anyone considering doing that. And just would also like to add Bad Morning News is seeking new hosts for the show. If you are interested in that, in Discord or in the comments. And with that, I'm Cryptic Cynic with you today, and we'll get to the first story. This first story is from Reason.com, written by Lenore Skenazy. 5-year-old has meth poisoning after trick-or-treating. It probably wasn't the Halloween candy. Braylon Carwell says he didn't eat anything, and previous candy poisonings turned out to be hoaxes. 5-year-old Braylon Carwell of Galion, Ohio, tested positive for meth after he returned from trick-or-treating. Galion schedules the Halloween tradition Sunday in October from 2 to 4 p.m. This is a strange case indeed. The boy says the only thing he put in his mouth from his stash of acquired Halloween goods was a pair of novelty teeth. Was there meth on the teeth? Did he eat a piece of candy he forgot or didn't mention, and that contained meth, or did he ingest the meth from someplace else? What we do know is that the boy told WBNS, "I was putting my socks on, and then I started an arm or my fingers until I got to the doctor's, and I was sitting for a little bit, and I could move my hand but not my fingers." According to his father, Cambray Carwell told officers that he had taken his children trick-or-treating on the city's west side. According to a police report, when they got home, Carwell told police the children removed their costumes and Braylon fell over having a seizure of some sort. Braylon had a couple of pieces of candy, his father said, but had placed fake vampire teeth into his mouth before he started shaking. Carwell said he threw the candy and police drove to the father's house to book the child's Halloween haul into evidence. Carwell and Pence did not immediately return calls from the Washington Post seeking comment. No one has been arrested in the drugging, and investigators have not identified a suspect. Galion Police Chief Brian Satterfield told the Post, and then there's this. The parents admit they are recovering drug addicts, according to NS. "I'm not covering up the truth," Mom Julia Pence told WBNS on Monday. "I'm just speaking the truth of what happened to my son yesterday. Nobody in my family or Braylon's dad's family would drug my children. There are 2 recorded cases of children dying from allegedly poisoned Halloween candy. The first instance involved a boy in Texas whose dad was $100,000 in debt, just taken out an insurance policy on him. Dad was convicted of the murder in 84. The other involved a boy who obtained some of his uncle's heroin, and the family decided to assign blame elsewhere. They went so far as to sprinkle some heroin on his candy. As for Braylon, I don't want to blame his parents, and I'm thrilled that they are in recovery, a case news because it is so extraordinarily rare, indeed unheard of, for a child to get drugged or poisoned Halloween candy from a stranger. Even if someone somehow did give Braylon some meth, this does not mean all parents should be on the alert for poison treats any more than drivers along the Long Island Expressway have to worry about getting hit by a frozen turkey, as one woman did years ago. Exceedingly rare cases are, well, exceedingly rare and shouldn't influence our daily life decisions. The boy's mom warned other parents, "It's your duty to protect your children from everything. You can't protect them from everything. You just have to be aware and do the ban. But one thing you don't have to protect them from is vampire teeth steeped in meth." And it's the end of that article. So, kind of a bizarre case that came out yesterday, and I think it just highlights that there's often a lot of scares around uh, kids candy from trick or treating potentially being poisoned by some random crazy people, but there's usually um, no evidence of that, and there are uh, many documented cases of that actually happening, and it's been used for more legislation, even though there's again no evidence, and this is kind of a bizarre case. Who knows where it came from? If it was, I mean, it seems unlikely to be from the candy. There is more to the story. The parents admit to being former drug addicts. Unfortunately, that maybe the kid got a hold of it um, somewhere, from his family, or maybe it is some random poison candy. Who knows? But uh, uh, the good news, I guess, is that actual poisonings by people of Halloween candy is rare, and certainly not something to necessarily be afraid of. And it would be a sad thing if people became so afraid and like that they didn't continue to do things like trick or treat, because that's a really fun thing, and I don't think Unfound Fear shouldn't get rid of that. So with that, I will check out comments. Danielle, bad morning to you as well. And Danielle says, "Yes, what a thing to do to a kid." Yeah, I mean, yeah, if someone did do it on purpose, that's pretty messed up there. So I would hope at least that's not the case. And this next article is also uh, via reason.com. Let's see. San Diego police creepily forced strippers to pose for photos, paying 1.5 million. A city ordinance let officers harass women as part of a licensing and inspection process. A judge ruled it unconstitutional. This article is written by Scott Shackford. The city of San Diego will pay a pack of strippers nearly 1.5 million for behavior sleazier than what you'd typically see at a club. San Diego has an ordinance to license strippers requiring them to get identification cards to show who they are. Then police got creepy. In 2013 and 2014, police came to two clubs, Cheetah's Gentlemen's Club and Expose, detained strippers for more than an hour and subjected them to bizarre inspections and lined them up to take their photographs, all using this ordinance as a justification. The women claimed police made demeaning comments to them and threatened to arrest them if they tried to leave. Back then, police said they were taking these photos to document the women's tattoos to track them, much like they do with gang members because they change their appearances. 17 women saw this as a violation of their constitutional rights and sued. In March, the women got a partial victory when a federal judge ruled that San Diego's ordinance violated their First Amendment rights. The judge ruled that the ordinance didn't have any provisions that prevented the police department from using it to harass the women, or the clubs to discourage them from allowing or participating in strip shows without any legal cause. Therefore, the ordinance violated the businesses and the women's rights to free expression. Unfortunately, the judge turned aside, for now anyway, claimed that the ordinance also violated the strippers' Fourth Amendment rights protecting them from warrantless searches. The judge determined that the strippers all agreed to reasonable searches when they get their license to be strippers. Given that it's mandatory to get a license, he's essentially saying that the city has the power to diminish their Fourth Amendment rights to some degree if they want to legally work. But he did say that the searches have to be reasonable, inviting the strippers' lawyers to introduce arguments that they were not reasonable or consensual before issuing a ruling. So there's still a possibility that the judge may further determine that there were Fourth Amendment violations as well. The city of San Diego had been trying to get the case dismissed and failing. So Tuesday, San Diego's city council approved two financial settlements, 110,000 to one dancer and 1.4 million to be split among 16 other dancers. The city is also reviewing the ordinance for potential fixes to make it constitutional. Here's a suggestion. The licensing process should consist of a simple check to make sure they are of legal age, then leave them alone. And that's that article there. And apparently, some occupational licensing, which I think is mostly used by police just as a source of income and not for any legitimate safety reason or whatever. In this case, it seems to have backfired upon the taxpayers, as it usually does, given that the settlement in this lawsuit was, over $1 million in total, and that ended up not working out well for those guys if they were making money for through the occupational licensing process, and now they're ending up having to pay this money out because they apparently went too far and tried to just have fun, it seems, and used the licensing as an opportunity to just make these people applying for a stripper license to just pose for weird photos randomly. And I mean, again, the idea that one needs a license in the first place is ridiculous, and taking photos of their tattoos to track them is creepy. I mean, what about I don't understand what it is that the police would need to track them for. It's just weird. Like, I don't understand that. As if the thing, whatever they're doing, is so almost, I don't know. They're just making it into such a complicated issue when it doesn't need to be. Because as the article mentioned, I mean, there's really no reason to check anything other than know that they're over legal age, I guess, if that's necessary. But all of this is just excessive. But we've seen this in a lot of states, just getting really greedy with local ordinances requiring licenses for varying occupations, whether it's strippers or hairdressers. Usually they have to pay some fee just to get a license, just to have whatever job they want. And it is all just very ridiculous. And I would hope, ideally, that there would be a way to, get rid of this requirement. But that's an uphill battle with a lot of the different occupations that now are being regulated by different states and localities. So, yeah, I mean, another waste of money thanks to the city council in San Diego. And, okay. This next article is com, written by CNN. Says biggest terror threat in U.S. is white men, and we have to do something about them. Good old CNN. Let's see. Yeah, complete failure to grasp the concept of irony. CNN's Don Lemon urged Americans not to demonize each other, and in the same breath called white men the biggest terror threat in this country. Speaking with co-host Chris Cuomo on Monday night, Lemon doing of two black people in a grocery store in Kentucky, a raft of pipe bombs mailed to Democratic figures, and Saturday's shooting dead of 11 worshippers at a Pittsburgh synagogue. The Kentucky and Pittsburgh shooters were white males, while Caesar, the mail bomb suspect arrested in Florida last Friday, has identified in the past as Native American. Lemon's initial message was one of tolerance. I keep trying to point out to people and not to demonize any one group or any one ethnicity, he told viewers. Then, as if completely forgetting the last sentence, Lemon switched to what sounded a lot like open racism. So we have to start people and realize the biggest terror threat in this country is white men, most of them radicalized to the right, and we have to start doing something about them, he said. Ban on them. There is no ban on. They had the Muslim ban. There is no white guy ban. So what do we do about that? Predictably, Lemon's blame Whitey monologue rankled conservatives on Twitter, and reactions. There were some calls for CNN to fire Lemon. Last week, NBC canceled Megyn Kelly's Today Show after the host defended blackface as an acceptable Halloween costume, but CNN has given no indication that it will follow suit. Lemon is no stranger to stirring racial controversy and seems to be an equal opportunities hater, as lives are the target after Kanye West visited the White House. Earlier this month, Lemon laughed with the rap star, a token Negro, and quipped Kanye West is what happens when Negroes don't. Is apparently content racially charged comments at work, however. Lemon has been dating a white man, advertising sales executive Tim Malone since 2017. The end of that article, typical CNN hypocrisy, and basically just trying to drive home this race baiting divide and conquer strategy for the establishment. I'm sure we know it's been going on for a long, and that's all you see anytime any of these shootings happen now is you making it into a racial thing or liberals calling for more gun control. Those are the only two things that ever seem to be spoken about on mainstream to any kind of or whatever happening now. Liberals trying to push the idea that white men are homegrown terrorists and should be feared. Mindset, just bolsters the police state because we know that has already, released their lists of suspicious people, and it includes people who are right wing, so called right wing movements, some of these militia type groups, or even just people who are part of the Tea Party listed by the government as being potentially, dangerous people. And, it's just convenient for them to sow this racial divide, I think. And but at the end of the article just kind of shows you that this may just be a complete show. I mean, and that's what it is on TV. It seems to be just as fake as that on TV these days. You know, Don Lennon has no problem. Don Lemon of CNN has no problem making those comments. Yet he's apparently dating. So he's taking his cues from whoever his overlords are, and being sure to do his part and say his appropriate lines, I suppose. Danielle says serves them right. Fourth Amendment rights apply to all Americans. Geez. Tell you what we do about it, we get rid of racist news people like Lemon. Better yet, someone should and his network. Yeah, Kanye West should sue him. But yeah, it's ironic that he stays, and apparently Megyn Kelly got fired from NBC, CNN so far. But why is Megyn Kelly fair to be fired over something that's it's just an opinion defending what black costumes. That's not even as bad as what Lemon is doing, directly calling white people potential terrorists and whatnot, calling for some kind of ban apparently, or more scrutiny or whatever it is. If that's the standard, then Lemon certainly would meet the standard of racism. But since CNN is only there to push an agenda that goes one way. We know that's not going to happen. I guess it's the progressive privilege that we talked about the other day with Hillary Clinton making comments as well, and of course no one cared about that. All right, this next article comes from activistpost.com. Witnessed DARPA seeks FAA approval for military drones over American cities by 2030 at the latest. Just a little over 10 years after drone surveillance inside U.S. borders was declared a conspiracy theory, it is now an indisputable fact of life. So too are military-grade drones along the border, which in reality constitutes a 100-mile wide swath that encircles the continental U.S. and two-thirds of its population. According to a new report from Defense One, this level of access is still seen as a restriction by the DARPA-directed military apparatus as new forms of autonomous aircraft take to the skies, such as the latest Black Hawk helicopter drones that could be ready by 2019. DARPA and aircraft developers want permission to fly over large cities as needed, utilizing a new artificial intelligence system that is literally called Matrix. Developers see an opportunity for more flexibility in potential use. Of course, surveillance isn't mentioned among those uses. Similar to Predator drone maker General Atomics, they have their eyes on FAA certification to fly large unmanned aircraft within the continental U.S. to help ferry people and supplies from the mainland to offshore oil rigs, among other potential jobs. Today, large drones like Predators are forbidden to fly over the U.S. except in a handful of largely unpopulated areas along the U.S. Mexico border. The FAA is now figuring out how to change guidelines to allow unmanned planes and helicopters to fly over big cities. We are working with the FAA on that. Our stated goal is 2030. It is very much dependent on rulemaking. We are certainly hoping for sooner, for the mid 2020s to field it, he said in that linked article sourced above. The long range plans of converting military aircraft to drones and incorporating them anywhere and everywhere inside America is also detailed and expanded upon as a potential replacement for the already controversial use of police drones. By 2025, enormous military style drones, close relatives of the sort made famous by counterterrorism strikes in Afghanistan and Iraq, will be visible 2,000 feet above U.S. cities, streaming high resolution video to police departments below. That is the bet that multiple defense contractors are placing anyway as they race to build unmanned aircraft that can pass evolving airworthiness certifications and replace police helicopters And if that bet pays off, it will radically transform the way cities, citizens, and law enforcement interact. We are now seeing various trends beginning to dovetail into what could become the ultimate in military presence over the United States. As I recently reported, new AI algorithms are being devised that look for emotional indicators in an attempt to predict crime and social unrest. The Eye in the Sky system, developed by Cambridge University, seeks to use small parrot drones to identify violent poses in crowds. The system will be powered by biometric recognition and artificial intelligence. Imagine a system like this being applied to the far more sophisticated military systems that already exist, then connecting all of it to the growing federal biometrics database. I suspect that if the FAA does grant access to larger military aircraft over U.S. cities, it will be with the strict guidelines that no forms of surveillance or weaponry will be permitted on board. Of course, once granted even the slightest access, all it will take is one catastrophic event to remove any restrictions at all. Unlike many new industries which grow unfettered until emerging problems prompt regulation, unmanned flight needs relief from existing restrictions in order to blossom. Cicero said, once that happens, the market for large unmanned planes could be enormous. For reference, here's what I wrote in 2013 regarding the long-term plans and eventuality that was also hinted at in the mainstream media at the time in an Associated Press article titled "Drones with Facial Recognition Technology Will End Anonymity Everywhere." AP certainly offers a correct summary of how the databases that already exist, where we thought our personal information was protected, will be opened and utilized anytime necessary. From seeing just the image of a face, computers will find its match in a database of millions of driver's license portraits and photos on social media sites. From there, the computer will link to the person's name and details such as their social security number, preferences, hobbies, families, friends. Adding that capability to drones that can fly into spaces where planes cannot, machines that can track a person moving about and can stay aloft for days means that people will give up privacy as well as the concept of anonymity. Naturally, the AP peddles this softly as it recounts these new developments in a tale of researchers with Carnegie Mellon University's Scilab Biometrics Center attempting to assist in sharpening FBI images of Boston bombing suspects, the Tsarnaev brothers. This is reminiscent of the above mentioned Chris Dorner manhunt, where we heard calls for how nice it would have been to have a drone at the ready for quicker identification and possible assassination. And there's a little more to that article, but I think that gives you a good overall idea of the topic here. And yeah, essentially, there's a huge demand by all the companies making drones, the military-industrial complex, to have this new market opened up, which would be domestic drones flying around within the U.S., which is currently restricted to certain areas along the border. If you all recall the New Mexico compound story that came out maybe 2 or 3 months ago, in that story, the CIA, uh, I think the CIA or the FBI already admitted that they did use drones to surveil the people at that supposed compound. Um, so apparently, it is already happening, and they're just looking for the okay to expand it to everywhere in the U.S. And it doesn't even the article doesn't even mention in its case with the FAA. The FAA would only be mostly looking at concerns about airspace and things like that. I don't think the FAA even really cares about the surveillance aspect, unsurprisingly. But I mean, yeah, obviously this is a potential, you know, addition. I mean, I feel like every day there's some new article about some new potential horrible thing that will just, increase the ever growing police state in the U.S. But yeah, this is just another means for them to do that. Potentially having, high resolution video of the ground. Obviously police would love that in some of the cases in the past where they've had these high profile manhunts. Um, People have said, well, it would have been so much easier if we just had a drone flying around instead of having to have people in helicopters fly around and look for people. But when you consider that they're incorporating biometrics and potentially identifying violent movements and certain poses among people. I mean, it just gets totally bizarre. I mean, imagine if a drone thought someone on the ground, looked like they were about to punch somebody and had the ability to, you know, either shoot them or even just stun them or even just like report them to the police or something like that, and send out some kind of alert with your exact location, and say, hey, there's a crime going on here, and the cops show up and assume that you're doing something untoward because a drone camera captured you posing in a certain way that it deemed dangerous. So, I mean, who knows what that could lead to. I mean, I don't know. The idea of having drones flying around and surveilling us is just, I mean, sadly, I think people are being conditioned to it gradually, and if things don't reverse, I think a lot of people would end up accepting it. And as the article alludes to, even if initially, they don't permit drones to be armed, or they don't even if they restrict their ability to surveil us, and take video recordings. All it would take would be another, false flag, essentially, or even any real event, just as another excuse for the government to seize more power and say, "See, we need you to give up more of your liberty, because your liberty is a threat to national security, and we need to be able to see everyone at all times and." Somehow preemptively predict violence with biometrics via drone. So, I mean, just some more scary stuff coming, unfortunately. And a lot of these people, these contractors creating these drones, are hopeful about it and are hoping that it becomes normal within 10 years or so, according to them. And check out some comments here. Danielle says, um, leftist media seems to be able to get away with anything and everything. I am sick of it. Just like Roseanne, the left has said far worse than she did. They can take their progressive privilege and choke on it for all I care. Yeah, exactly. I think that's definitely true. I can't really, because yeah, I mean the media is certainly far in the tank for leftists, and it seems that the only people who end up punished are those who don't fall in with the left talking points. Basically, anyone who goes against that is punished and ostracized from Hollywood, it seems. And Danielle says, even with regulations, how would we know? Yeah, I mean, again, just like every law and every supposed restriction, we have the Fourth Amendment and all these amendments, and we read stories every day about how you know cops will violate your constitutional rights or any other restrictions, and potentially get sued way later down the line, and usually don't face any kind of punishment at all. So restrictions are a dime a dozen when it comes to this. As we know, nothing will stop the powers that be, really, other than people really waking up to it and really, you know, if it would take a mass amount of people to really wake up and assert themselves, and I don't know if that will happen, just because it seems to me like most people are just easily led and easily being tricked into accepting more and more of this into their daily life, kind of like the boiling frogs theory, where if you put frogs in boiling water, they don't notice it until it's too late. And I feel like that's at least where the American people are now. It's going to be far too late if and when they ever realize what situation they're in. And this next article is from ZeroHedge.com, written under Durden account. Nearly $6 billion belonging to dead Libyan dictator Gaddafi has gone missing. Nearly 9 months after Politico first reported that interest payments stemming from 70 billion in frozen assets formerly belonging to the regime of deceased Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi had been paid to opaque accounts belonging to the Libyan Investment Authority. UN investigators are finally looking into where the money went. At last count, RT reported that interest payments generated by the assets had reached $5.7 billion, according to public broadcast RTBF, which cited anonymous sources familiar with the money flows. The money may have gone to accounts controlled by Libyan militia groups that have been accused of human back in 2011. As NATO bombs were falling over Tripoli, nations voted to sanction Libya and freeze all assets belonging to the Gaddafi regime that were being held abroad. As Politico explained, the regime had spread its capital across Europe and North America, investing in companies as diverse as the Italian bank Unicredit to the British publisher Pearson. But Brussels-based Euroclear, which had custody of four of the regime-linked accounts, chose not to halt the interest payments flowing out of those accounts. That's because in the EU, where national governments were charged with enforcing the sanctions, it was decided that only the assets themselves would be frozen, not the interest payments stemming from those assets. Instead, capital continued to flow from these assets into accounts controlled by the Libyan Investment Authority, a nebulous quasi-state affiliated organization that controlled the seized assets when Gaddafi was still in power. These interest payments stemmed from stock dividends, bond coupon payments, and other sources of revenue. So far, Belgian authorities have denied any responsibility for allowing the loophole in the sanctions regime. Belgian Foreign Minister Didier Reynders, told reporters on Tuesday that he wasn't involved in the decision to unblock interest on deposits. This decision to unblock funds is the responsibility of the Finance Ministry. I have not headed it since December 6, 2011, and have not made any decisions on this matter. Reynders said. Instead, he pointed the finger at former Finance Minister Steven Van Ackery, whom he said was in charge when the ministry granted permission to unfreeze the interest payments. Meanwhile, the UN is also investigating the disappearance of billions of dollars that are believed to have been embezzled from the Gaddafi accounts, according to Belgian MP Georges Gilles. UN documents confirm that Belgium failed to comply with the UN resolution on freezing Libyan assets. Gilles told RTBF, adding that he had only received fragmentary information from Belgian authorities. The politician said it is necessary to clarify the situation, which may lead to a big scandal because hundreds of millions of euros were sent to unknown individuals in Libya. As Politico Europe exposed in an investigation published back in February, interest payments from frozen accounts linked to Gaddafi had been flowing to bank accounts in Bahrain and Luxembourg. in recent years in apparent contravention of an EU order stipulating that the former Libyan dictator's wealth was to be held in trust for the Libyan people to access once the country still riveted by conflict. Years after, then U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton helped topple Gaddafi's regime by pushing for a NATO led intervention that helped rebels topple his regime. Since then, Libya has fractured into separate fiefdoms ruled by competing warlords. A UN recognized government still rules in Tripoli, while a rival administration has seized power in the eastern port of Tobruk. Across the country, Islamist insurgencies also contribute to the instability. While Gaddafi's wealth is meant to be held in trust, war shattered countries flowed from frozen accounts in Brussels to bank accounts in Luxembourg and Bahrain over recent years. The LIA's finances remain murky, and the only aspect of this situation that is clear is that the interest payments are going to someone. But the individual or individuals who ultimately control the disparate LIA accounts remain a mystery, though we'd be willing to wager that whatever the money is being used for, it has nothing to do with the welfare of the Libyan people. And that's the end of that article. This former dictator Gaddafi, who Hillary Clinton had killed and had overthrown, and now the country is in complete chaos following that intervention back in 2011. Now all the money he had that was supposed to go to help the people in Libya has now disappeared. Apparently, a lot of that money that was supposed to be frozen has disappeared, and it's the rest of it is being held in a trust that's supposed to be only until the war-torn country stabilizes. Which even that alone, who knows when that will be? Thanks to Hillary Clinton, now I mean, conditions there are horrible, and it just kind of seems like a lose-lose situation. I mean, I have no clue when anything could possibly stabilize in Libya. So it seems convenient for billions of dollars to now be kind of stuck. And who knows what interests there are who could potentially be receiving the payouts from the interest in that. But you know, always just bizarre goings on, and unfortunately, we'll probably never know the answer to a lot of this stuff. I will check the comments here. All right. This next article is from Reason.com, written by San Diego County officials said they could take children away from parents and examine their genitals. A court disagrees. The children were subjected to invasive, potentially traumatizing procedures, absent constitutionally required safeguards. San Diego County may not remove children from their homes and subject them to highly intrusive physical examinations without parental permission. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit has ruled. This ruling was 8 years in the making. The case stems from an April 2010 incident involving Michael and Melissa Mann and their 4 young children. The Manns had apparently spanked at least one of the children with a wooden spoon as a form of punishment, a dreadful thing to be sure, which attracted the attention of San Diego's Health and Human Services Agency. The county took the children away from their parents and placed them in a temporary shelter, the Polinsky Children's Center, where the parents went to court to regain custody. At Polinsky, a doctor performed a 22-step medical exam requiring blood samples and a gynecological and rectal exam, according to the Associated Press. The Ninth Circuit's decision elaborated on what this entailed. And I'm not going to actually read that part because it's too disturbing, but I will have the link up if you all want to read the details on that. County officials did not obtain a court order authorizing these examinations, nor did the parents sign off. Indeed, the Manns didn't even know what had been done to their kids until one of them said something about it later. The county's actions violated the Manns' Fourth and 14th Amendment rights, the court ruled. The Manns were deprived of their right to raise their children without undue interference from the government, the right to make medical decisions for their children, and the right to privacy in their family life. The Mann children were subjected to invasive, potentially traumatizing procedures absent constitutionally required safeguards. Although we must balance these fundamental rights against the state's interest, we conclude that the county is constitutionally required to provide parental notice and obtain parental consent or judicial authorization for the protection of parents and children's rights alike. This case calls to mind the insane actions of police in Manassas, Virginia, who sought and obtained a warrant to give a 17-year-old boy an erection so they could photograph it as evidence in a teen sexting matter. To protect children from things like spanking and sexting, the authorities evidently believed it was necessary to subject them to sexual abuse. And that's the end of that article. Yeah, just it took 8 years just for these people to get that ruling, and again, that just shows you, how little uh, regulations and constitutional rights really mean in the general scheme of things, where law enforcement has pretty much the authority to do whatever they want, and maybe potentially be questioned about it years later. And but I doubt the people who did this, will be punished in any way. Of course, after traumatizing these kids over what seems very minor, and that's one of the big problems overall with child protective services in the U.S. It seems like increasingly a lot of people can just kind of call CPS on people with any allegation, and they immediately take people's kids away based on no evidence, and then they go and do all of these examinations, including invasive medical procedures to determine if they were abused. Ironically, subjecting them to state abuse, and apparently we're supposed to believe that the state only does it in their interest. And unfortunately, a lot of statistics and experiences of people have shown that a lot of kids who go into the foster system or things like that, go into the state systems, end up being abused in many ways, and oftentimes end up way worse off than they were in the household they were taken away from, with a lot of kids being taken away from parents who use drugs, some even taken away from parents using drugs for using like marijuana for medicinal purposes, have been taken away and put into situations where they were then sexually and physically abused. And the state, holds itself up as, a protector of children when in a lot of cases they're doing more harm than good, especially when people these days seem more paranoid and more willing to call CPS over things that really aren't their business. I know there's one story recently I saw on Reason of a woman who let her child play alone in a kid's playground in their apartment complex, and he was just feet away from the mom's, or the apartment, and a neighbor called the cops and said she was letting her kid play alone in this park on this playground that's right in the middle of an apartment complex, and the kid was taken away because unfortunately it's kind of that see something, say something that's being imposed on us by the government, basically wanting us to snitch on each other and be their extra set of eyes to surveil each other, as if, all the drones and uh, internet surveillance and everything else, biometrics these days aren't enough. Now we're people are turning on each other in a lot of cases, it seems, and very unfortunate to see. And that's the second story today out of San Diego, and that makes me glad that I do not live in San Diego anymore. I spent 5 years there when I was a kid, and I'm just glad I'm not there. There's a lot of ridiculous things going on in California. I think a lot of you would agree with that. And it's ironic that the judge said, we have to respect, the parents' rights to raise their children without undue interference from the government and to make medical decisions for them when, that's something that California especially has not respected at all, more and more in recent years, where they have taken away parents' ability to even refuse vaccination without their kid. Again, that alone can, become a CPS case as well in California and other places in the U.S. So, I mean, and of course, just the mandatory public schooling. Yeah, I mean, California is certainly not a one to care about the government interfering with parents' rights to raise their children as they see fit. So, unfortunately, not surprising to hear this story, but just another sad example of where things are. And with that, let's see. I'll hit up this article from RT.com. China's Xi tells military war as U.S. Navy warns of high seas encounters. Chinese President Xi Jinping told military officials responsible for the disputed South China Sea to be better prepared for war as tensions with the U.S. are rising. Beijing may be bracing for a worst case scenario with the U.S. Xi made the blunt remarks last week as he was meeting the Southern Theater Command, the military officials responsible for one of China's 5 strategic war zones. The calls were made on Thursday as part of his 4-day visit to Guangdong province, but the Chinese state media reported them only on Friday. It's necessary to strengthen the mission and concentrate preparations for fighting a war. President Xi said we need to take all complex situations into consideration and make emergency plans accordingly. One of the key responsibilities of the Southern Theater Command is protecting China's interests in the South China Sea, where Beijing claims sovereignty over a number of islands. The sea is of strategic importance to Chinese trade. The U.S. rejects the territorial claims and has been sending so-called freedom of navigation missions through the waters and airspace, which Beijing considers its own, as a gesture of defiance. Chief of U.S. Naval Operations Admiral Richardson said Tuesday the U.S. and China will meet each other more and more on the high seas as the two nations confront each other in the South China Sea. Xi's remarks are a sign of irritation that the Chinese government has accumulated about the policies of the Trump administration, believes Victor Gao, director of the China National Association of International Studies. The U.S. has been pushing China around, humiliating China, imposing unilateral tariffs on Chinese exports, and also declaring China as its rival and a major threat to the U.S. survival, he told RT. Xi is preparing for the worst case scenario. Gao said Beijing is not certain about Washington's policies vis-a-vis China, so the military will be right to prepare for a final showdown with the United States, considering that both nations have nuclear weapons. An open war conflict may lead to an Armageddon involving mankind as a whole. He added, the expert said it's up to the U.S. to abandon its bullying tactics towards China. China does not want to have a trade war with the U.S. China does not want to have an armed conflict with the US, but if the US really wants to impose these things on China, the Chinese people will be fully mobilized behind the Chinese government. And the US is currently engaged in a full-blown trade war with China, which resulted in both sides imposing tariffs and other restrictions on each other's products. Washington also recently cited a threat from Chinese missiles as justification for abandoning a key nuclear arms treaty with Russia, further undermining the Cold War era non-proliferation mechanisms. Amid the growing tension, Beijing has been injuring America's position as the holder of the only world currency, selling out U.S. Treasury securities and switching out of dollar in its trade with third countries. And that's the end of that article. Basically, just the latest in the endless saga between Chinese government and the U.S. government, with the U.S. asserting that they're wanting to keep certain areas open for trade and whatnot, when really it mostly ends up being the U.S.'s military interest in the area. And to me, it's just funny to see the U.S. complaining about aggression when they're sending U.S. ships all the way out over there, like immediately off of their coasts, and complaining. Um, you know, I think the U.S. doesn't belong there, honestly. Um, it's just all of our tax money being spent on just endless millions and billions of dollars on all of these naval vessels doing what exactly? Just sailing around and showing its presence and domination. But what else is new with government? Not too much, but I also read that there are supposed to be talks between Xi and Trump coming up, so maybe this is just more saber rattling, and maybe they'll be able to have a discussion of some kind, hopefully, and avert you know more ridiculousness and more tariffs, because I don't tariffs only increase prices on things that people want, and people can't afford to be paying more for goods and services, or goods uh, at this time. I don't think most people can really afford to pay much more. And with that, let's see. Daniel says Xi should just cool his jets and figured China's gravy train at our expense is over, and it was lucky to have it as long as it did. If we weren't there, China would occupy everything in Asia by now. And possibly true, but um, I don't think that's our business really. So, let those countries deal with it on their own. And it ends up being a false dichotomy where either areas in that region are going to be dominated by China or by the U.S. And that's what I find most unfortunate, is that the people in those countries end up having very little say over their own lives, because yeah, either China or the U.S. is going to be there to dominate. And that's what's happened with so many regions in Southeast Asia, whether it's Guam, or even Hawaii, or the Philippines, or Japan. Lots of local people there are really tired of U.S. Military presence, but their governments have chosen to side with the U.S. over China. And it again, there's just never any winner for people, just ordinary people. It's always at the top. It's always just a power shift, power games, but you know, just not much hope out there for people who want to govern themselves, and that's what ends up happening. All right, that brings us to the top of the hour. I'll just remind everybody that tomorrow's Friday, which means it's a community episode. So if you have any comments or any articles you would like covered tomorrow, post the link in the community link section in the Discord, and we'll be sure to get to that tomorrow. And let's see. Oh, I missed a couple comments here. Sorry. Danielle says everything that woman got involved in turns to crap. She's a waste of space. I am a bit feistier than usual today, lol. God, talking about adding trauma to trauma, what the hell? And damn, Virginia under the Democrats is as bad as California. What a nightmare. State abuse is exactly what it is. Take a minor matter and elevate it to a nightmare for a child. And what is wrong with just having the parents go to some classes to be better parents through education? Yes, I think that California is officially insane. And Daniel says, so far Trump and Xi seem able to talk amiably. Let's see how it goes. And okay. Okay, yeah, sometimes the comments are acting weird. Yeah, I hopefully it's not censoring you. But yeah, I don't know what's up with YouTube. You know, it's YouTube, so I wouldn't be surprised if they were trying to censor people at this point. But also, it's just not too well made. The comments thing doesn't seem to work too well a lot of the time. But with that, as I said, tomorrow's the community episode, and I hope you guys. I hope to see you guys tomorrow. With that, I'll just mention one more time. If anyone out there is interested in hosting with Bad Morning News, let us know in the Discord or in the comments. And with that, I'll see you guys tomorrow. This has been episode 74 of Bad Morning News for November 1st, 2018. Have a bad morning, guys. Remember, screw the state, fuck the system. I'll see you all tomorrow.